The Dailywire would be nothing if it didn't have its bread and butter fully invested in getting Americans to hate each other or be afraid of one another based on various differences and characteristics. But his argument, Pierce,
what is wrong in them being encouraged to tell people?
When these individuals go to the law enforcement, the way that our laws work, they don't move quickly enough or respond quickly enough.
And just a countless number of straight young white men who do the same thing, but it's not politically convenient to talk about those people.
In this clip, we're going to see Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks, as well as Brian Tyler Cohen, shut down this MAGA Dailywire dimwit and her anti-trans rhetoric. You're literally going to see it in this clip. So as usual, let's watch the clip in full. I'm going to leave my perspective, my commentary towards the end. Let's not waste any time. Let's get straight into it.
I just want to start, Isabel Brown, with this sort of strange pattern we're seeing. Not overwhelming, not particularly conclusive. Dr. Phil thinks it's being kind of a bit of a distraction to the real problem. But there's certainly been a steady spate of mass shootings being perpetrated by people identifying as trans, including this appalling mass shooting in Canada. What do you feel is behind that? It's a different trend to what we were used to.
It is, Piers, and you're absolutely correct. This is an observable pattern of behavior, objectively speaking. Before I get into any of that, I want to say I'm glad to see you back on the show, and I hope you're healing well. We're thinking of you often, and it's a pleasure to be having this conversation. So we're praying for you every day. But ultimately, look, I think we have to learn how to have a transparent conversation across ideological boundaries here, from the foundation that all school shooters are mentally ill. You have to have an element of mental derangement in order to be driven to the point of massacring innocent children in a school. We used to be able to say that until about 5 minutes ago in society, but in order for us to be intellectually consistent about this conversation, I think we have to also acknowledge that relatively recently in human history, gender dysphoria itself was considered a mental illness. And we owe it to society to start asking ourselves, is gender dysphoria A, or B, how we are treating gender dysphoria with the affirmative care model and this mass psychosis of medication that we've seen across Western civilization, as you just pointed out a few minutes ago, contributing to further mental illness that is driving an epidemic of violence? If the answer is yes, dramatic changes need to be made in our society. But unfortunately, we're living in a time where the media only seems to be wanting to perpetrate the division further by calling this Canadian shooter from last week a female, even though we know that was not psychologically or biologically correct whatsoever. And with all due respect to Dr. Phil in particular, I have nothing but respect for him. To ignore the trans element of this, I think, is to ignore a key component of the psychological struggle that we are starting to see pop up all over Western civilization. This person started transitioning in Canada at the age of 12, which of course is likely to be linked to later psychological issues in their life that inevitably led to one of the most deadly shootings in Canadian history, injuring 25 and claiming the lives of 9 people, including a mother and a stepbrother to this shooter. That is mental illness. And until we can acknowledge that universally, it's a tough conversation for us to even have in the first place.
Anna Kasparian, what's your response?
I'd like to jump in on this. Yeah, my response to it is the Dailywire would be nothing if it didn't have its bread and butter fully invested in getting Americans to hate each other or be afraid of one another based on various differences and characteristics. I'd like to actually focus on something a little alarming that Dr. Phil said in the context of that interview. I happen to agree with him that the transgender angle, which tends to get rolled out for political reasons here and there, isn't really material to the issue here. I think the big issue is that this shooting is being used to justify mass surveillance programs and these so-called pre-crime efforts that corporations like Palantir have a financial interest in pushing for. So I do think that mass shootings are a problem, whether you're talking about it in the United States, where it's definitely pronounced, or in places like Canada. And if we want to address, mental health concerns, that's one thing. But this issue of surveilling people and focusing on pre-crime, I don't want to live in a society like that, and I suspect most Americans don't either.
But didn't Dr. Phil make a strong point there that if 90% of all mass shootings, when they investigated them, they discovered the mass shooter had told at least one person in advance normally someone they were at school with or a friend or whatever, about their plan, is that not clear evidence that actually what he's suggesting makes perfect common sense? In other words, just alerting people.
Well, his argument,
that if you are informed,
right?
If you're informed by somebody that you know they're going to commit,
But his
a heinous
argument,
crime,
Pierce,
what is wrong in them being encouraged to tell people?
When these individuals go to the law enforcement, the way that our laws work, they don't move quickly enough or respond quickly enough. So I'm not quite sure what his solution would be here, because he even gave us the theoretical situation in which a student hears from a fellow classmate that they plan on shooting up the school. They immediately report it to the authorities, and the authorities, because of the way things work, don't respond to it sufficiently. Okay, so then what is the what's the pitch here? What is he pitching for? What exactly would happen in a case that doesn't include the authorities, because the authorities aren't sufficient in handling these situations? I just think that right now there is a concerted effort to repeal or do away with some of our privacy rights, because there is a very real competition happening in AI. And at the World Economic Forum, you have major actors in the Western world talking about how we can't compete with AI because we have privacy rights that China doesn't have to worry about. So just be very mindful of calls for surveillance where they exploit tragic mass shooting incidents or any other incident in order to get Americans or people in the global sphere to really reconsider whether their privacy matters in the face of these boogeymen or, security issues.
It's interesting. I mean, I was talking about the gun aspect of this with Dr. Phil, and I do remember being stunned that I think it's 35% of Americans do not believe they should even be required to register their guns as to where they keep them, because they were genuinely concerned about their government becoming tyrannical and therefore having a database of exactly who had guns and where they're keeping them. And that struck me as a sort of bizarre way of looking what is about, to me, is a clear part of the problem, which is America has an extraordinary prevalence of firearms, which is unlike anywhere else in the world. Anyway, Blair White, let me come to you. You've been waiting patiently. You are a trans person, so you're best qualified to discuss this in many ways. What do you feel? I mean, do you feel there is no causal link here in this increasing number, albeit still relatively small, but increasing number of mass shootings involving people identifying as trans? Do you feel, as Dr. Phil did, that it's kind of a bit irrelevant that people from all types are doing these things? Or do you think that there is a relevance in terms of gender dysphoria, maybe gender affirming drugs that people take and so on, that could all be playing a part?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, what I feel is an incredible amount of sadness for the fact that this person killed their family, and then, obviously the children that were victims in the school. It's a tragedy from a 360 view. So that's first and foremost. I think you have to look at this from a multidimensional perspective. And I very much agree with Anna when she brought up the concerns over AI and privacy. I was also going to say that, the only other time there was a shooting like this in Canada's history, there was a huge rollback on gun rights for Canadians. So I do have a concern about that for them. I have probably more of a concern for them than they have for themselves about that. When it comes to the trans aspect, I'm going to be a little in between Anna and Dr. Phil here. I don't think it's entirely irrelevant, but I think that there's so many other factors. So for instance, when it comes to Canada, there's a huge pipeline issue where people with a number of comorbidities and other mental illnesses are being funneled through the trans healthcare system. So it's currently illegal in Canada for a therapist to push back in any way, give any amount of criticism, or even questioning someone who they're seeing and is questioning if they should transition or not. They basically just have to support that, even if they suspect or know that that person has other mental illnesses. And when it comes to the shooter, he did have other mental illnesses. Apparently, he was using SSRIs. He had multiple illnesses. He posted on Reddit himself. He was using drugs, psychedelics, and cross-sex hormones. So I think that's a really terrifying cocktail of different things coming to play. And, there's been a lot of statistics posted recently. I think I saw Elon post one that trans people are the most likely to shoot up schools. I have an issue with that because that same graph says that Asians are the second most likely. And I don't think anyone thinks that Asians are committing more crime than white people when it comes to mass shootings, unfortunately. White people, we have to kind of take that a little bit. I think it's a complicated issue. And I think that when you look at the things that cover all demographics that commit these violent acts, SSRIs are a huge common factor that we don't want to talk about. I also, unfortunately, have to piggyback more on what Anna was saying. You know, when it comes to these last few trans shooters in America, since 2020, there is an uptick from it. And not to be conspiratorial, but to be conspiratorial, several of them had links to the CIA. Their parents worked for Palantir and for different AI companies that were working on this pre-crime stuff. And so it is a thing. And I don't know how deep we want to go on that, but again, I'm somewhere in the middle. I think that the trans part matters in the sense of the trans healthcare system, especially in Canada, is incredibly destructive, and people who should not be transitioning are under their rules. But also when it comes to SSRIs and mental health issues, those seem to be, and even fatherlessness. You know, the father of this shooter came out and posted, "I have nothing to do with this child. I'm not in his life," seemingly as a way to distance himself from his child, if that makes him look any better. But we have a lot of statistics going back decades about what fatherlessness can, you know, cause in people in terms of incarcerations, violence, drug abuse. So I think it's a lot of things, and society is in a really sick place. And so you're going to see that spread across everybody and everything. And I'm just really sad this happened more than anything.
Yeah, you know, you said a lot of very interesting things there. I've done a lot of research into this over the years, particularly into mass shootings. And I think the bottom line is this for me, is that America has about the same amount of mentally ill people pro rata per capita of most of the top 20 countries, developed countries in the world, including the UK. The difference that America has is that it has 80% of the world's pain-killing medication is taken by Americans, I think I read. And certainly when it comes to the prevalence of an easy access to guns, America's out on its own, certainly compared to someone like the UK, where hardly anybody ever gets shot. So I think it's the combination that America has, which is why America has so many mass shootings. And I don't think there's an easy fix. And yeah, Brian, by all means, yeah.
Yeah, I also think, like, we would be crazy to ignore the fact that that the political focus on trans individuals who commit mass shootings is because it is politically advantageous for one side to focus on trans individuals who commit mass shootings. I mean, there is Adam Lanza and Nicholas Cruz and just a countless number of straight young white men who do the same thing, but it's not politically convenient to talk about those people. You've all identified a lot of factors that play into these shootings, whether it's mental illness, whether it's family issues, whether it's the prevalence of guns in this country, medication, whatever it may be. But to pretend like this is some issue with just trans individuals is clearly allowing politics or disdain for a certain subset of people to cloud everybody's vision for what is a tragic and frankly uniquely American occurrence that overwhelmingly takes place at the hands of young white men in this country. So again, I understand, like, I've worked in politics long enough to understand why it is a convenient scapegoat to point to trans people who commit mass shootings. But to do that, I think, is just oozing in bad faith. And I think it is, frankly, doing a disservice to the real problems at the core of this stuff that I think we would all be well served to try and figure out. But of course, politics pervades everything.
I mean, wait there. Let me.
You know, Piers, if
Yeah,
I
I mean,
can just
I
jump in
think,
there.
yeah, by all means, yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing some interesting accusations being thrown out there about disdain for trans people, or people trying to drive further division here, or just downright hatred for an entire subset of the population. I don't think that that's really where most people are coming from in wanting to have this conversation. It's certainly not where I'm coming from. Ultimately, I think Dr. Phil said it beautifully, that this is a preventative issue. If we can take into our hands in society the opportunity to prevent the level of psychological derangement that people are having in killing indiscriminately young children in their school, that is the most important thing we can do. If that involves having extra compassion for people who are already struggling with the weight of mental dysphoria of their gender, when they look in the mirror and they don't see themselves in the reflection staring back at them, I think that is something worthy of society to go further into. Affirmative care is being thrown out the window by most leading medical experts in the West today. Several countries have come out to say there is little to no scientific evidence whatsoever in support of transitioning, especially children and adolescents. And in fact, the potential dangers are substantially higher than any potential benefit so-called affirmative treatment protocols would ever provide to young people. The UK has been a leading country on this issue. Sweden, Norway, most of the Scandinavian countries. The United States and Canada are very, very far behind the 8 ball. And as Blair mentioned, are really leaning in further to this affirmative care model where people are getting their medical licenses taken away or being told they'll be fired from their schools if they express any sort of "are you sure" sentiment to a young person saying that they are the opposite sex. This is a really severe problem, but it is rooted in compassion. And ultimately, I think if we can start having that conversation, that we care about people enough not to want them to end up at this level of far beyond help psychological derangement, that's where we can start having some real serious progress in society.
Well, I think also...
So I'm going to leave it there, guys. I will leave the link in the description to the full exchange, but I just want to give some of my thoughts really quick. I just don't understand why this is even being introduced as a narrative, because trying to create some form of link between being trans and mass shootings, from all the research that I've done, the numbers just don't support it. Trans people make up a very small share of the population, between 0.5 to 1%, and the vast majority of mass shootings are committed by cisgender males and especially young men. So cases that are involving a trans shooter, they get disproportionate media attention. To kind of piggyback off the back of what it is that Brian Tyler Cohen says, especially people on the right will then take that and run with it and turn it into an agenda for themselves. But what they don't want to do is they don't want to take a look at the actual facts that America has a gun problem. Well, I'm not sure on what Canada's gun laws are. I'm not sure about that. But right here in the United Kingdom, we literally never have a mass shooting here because of the fact that we don't have guns. But any single time that somebody is on the right and you want to introduce an idea of, okay, we need to do something to look at the gun problem. No. Second Amendment, Second Amendment, Second Amendment. So what they will do is they'll take the conversation, they'll take the narrative, and they'll turn it into a negative one to try and go after and try and attack trans people. But they don't want to have a conversation of real compassion to put America in a position where these mass shootings don't happen in general. Crazy stuff. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. While you guys down there, hit the subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up purely for the YouTube algorithm. I'm really, really eager to hear your guys' thoughts and perspective in the comment section below. See you guys in the next one.